WJC family. It is time for our weekly Torah Talk. This week, the Parsha is Shemot, the very first Parsha in the book of the same name, the book of Exodus. And we are launching into the story of Moses, introduced to Moses as a character, and of course, the story of the redemption of the Jews from slavery in Egypt. When we meet Moses, he's a refugee orphan, right? Saved by his mother and his sister in a basket down the Nile River, raised as a prince of Egypt. He's gotten himself into some trouble defending Hebrew slaves and has had to flee to Midian. And now here he is in Midian. He's met his father-in-law Jethro, and he's shepherding his flocks, having married Tzipporah, Jethro's daughter, and he comes to this nondescript mountain. It says a holy mountain. We are told it is Sinai or Horeb, the same mountain where revelation will happen for the Jewish people after Moshe completes his mission. And Moses is distracted by a bush that is burning, but doesn't seem to be being consumed. V'hasne boer ba'esh, right? The bush is a fire, is burning with fire. V'hasne enenu uchal, but the bush was not being eaten, was not consumed. Moshe notices this. Other people might not, by the way. A random brush fire in the desert. You have to be awfully observant to notice that the brush itself is not burning up. So he turns aside and he comes, and God's voice calls from the bush, Moshe, Moshe, and he answers, Hineni, I am here. And then a very, very interesting pasuk, a very, very interesting verse. This is chapter 3, verse 5. Vayomer al tikrav halom. The voice said, do not come closer. Shal ne'alecha me'al raglecha. Remove your sandals from your feet. Ki hamakom asher ata omed alav. Because the place upon which you are standing, admat kodeshu, it is holy ground. It's a really interesting idea, right? What does it mean to have holy ground, to have sacred space? We've had a few incidents so far in the Torah, in the book of Genesis, where people set up altars. Sometimes it was even reported that those altars had become places where there were shrines to the present day meaning present day of the writing of the Torah. But we haven't had this idea of holy ground. So the question is the ground itself something innately sacred in the soil? And the answer seems to be no. Rashi tells us that it's not the soil, it's the place. Because of the agreement of the adjective and the noun in Hebrew, Kodesh must be agreeing with Hamakom. The place is holy. Admat would be feminine, says Rashi, and Kodesh is not a feminine word. This idea of sacred space is something I want to explore today, because don't we all want that? Don't we all want sacred spaces in our lives, places we can go and just feel the presence of God, the presence of holiness, the presence of something sacred? What exactly makes a space like that? So Rashi says it's not, or implies that it's not the ground itself being holy. Okay, good to know. Sadia Gaon, I've been doing a little bit of a study of Sadia Gaon, the book of beliefs and opinions, and Sadia Gaon, in commenting on this, says it is not the ground itself, but what is going to occur in that ground, on that ground, that matters. The ground, he says, is made holy. What makes the ground holy? Seems to be somehow the connection between God and Moses that's about to take place there. And the Ramban expands on it even further, Nachmanides, and says that, Moshe is still pretty far away from the bush. He says, don't come any closer. It's not just the bush itself that has this holiness, but the whole mountain has become holy, Nachmanides points out. And the reason why that is important is because it means that it's not God's presence alone that makes the holiness. It's God and Moses on the mountain together, and their meeting seems to be creating a huge sacred space between them on the mountain. What seems to create holy space, a holy place here, is the meeting between God and a person in holiness. That somehow Moshe's recognition of the wonder of the bush that's burning but not being consumed, and God's coming in the form of this bush to be discovered, is in itself a holy moment. And so too, we have the power to create holy spaces. Right? We try and do that in our sanctuaries by coming to reach out to God in prayer and to hear God's teaching through the recitation of Torah. But there are all kinds of sacred spaces that we create. Right? A chuppah can be a sacred space when I stand under the chuppah with a wedding couple and we invoke kiddushin, the holy nature of the union of two people. There we have created a holy space, a holy place at that chuppah. And so too with other life cycle events, right? When we stand at a grave and place earth on the casket and recognize that, we come from dust and to dust we shall return, but the soul returns to God who gave it. In facilitating that union of the soul with God, that trip to the Olam Haba, again, we are creating sacred space. Now, sometimes space becomes sacred and it's so concentrated that it stays forever, right? The Temple Mount will always be sacred. The Western Wall, the Kotel HaMa'arivi, will also always be sacred. So much focus of sacred energy, so much outreach from people to God, so much outreach from God to people on that mountain, Har Moriah, the Temple Mount, has occurred that space will always be sacred. Some spaces are more temporarily made sacred, like a spot where we have a chuppah. But when we want to bring holiness into our lives, that is easy, right? By doing mitzvot, whether it's a wedding or helping a stranger or helping those we love or lighting Shabbat candles, all of those things create a sacred place. We happen to be at a moment that will hopefully not last too long of this new Omicron variant wave, where we are finding ourselves stuck again in places. Maybe not, thank God, to the extreme from when COVID originally erupted in March of 2020, but not great either. And as we find ourselves in these places, it's a good reminder that we have the ability to create sacred space, to create a makom kodesh, and all it takes is reaching out to each other in sacredness of one kind or another. And I hope over this next little while we're all able to discover that sacredness, to create those spaces, to remember how time with family, undertaking sacred activities, celebrating sacred moments, we don't have to go far to experience that holiness. We can do it right in our own homes, right in our own neighborhoods. And I pray that we all are able to have that sense of Kodesh in our lives, maybe not to the extreme that Moshe was able to experience it. None of us quite get that privilege, but in very real and very meaningful ways. May we all have that Kedusha this Shabbos. May we all have that Kedusha in our lives as we navigate our way forward together with those we love and with those we share sacred relationships. Shabbat Shalom.